In the name of the Lord. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guest argues that Islam is too big and too successful to be the work of just one spirit. Tracing the pagan religions of the nations around ancient Israel, he makes the bold claim that the religion of Muhammad is actually a collaboration by the old gods of Mesopotamia, a desperate partnership of fallen angels who were caught off guard by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Derek Gilbert hosts Skywatch TV, a weekly Christian television program, and co-hosts Sci Friday, a weekly television program that looks at science and news with his wife, author, and analyst Sharon K. Gilbert. He's a Christian, a husband, a father, and the author of the groundbreaking books, The Great Inception and Last Clash of the Titans. He also is the co-author with Josh Peck of, I'm going to read this right, of a book that exposes the occult origins of the modern UFO phenomena, The Day the Earth Stands Still. Derek is a popular conference speaker and has been a professional broadcaster for more than four decades. He's a lifelong fan of the Chicago Cubs. Prefers glasses to contacts. He's been known to sing the high part in a barbershop and gospel quartet. He's a featured guest here on Revealing the Truth and appears on the second Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour. Joining us now to talk about his newest book, actually part 1.15 of his new book, Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the most diabolical double cross in history, is Derek Gilbert. Derek, welcome to a stumbled, bumbled, and botched introduction.
No worries. It's an honor to be here, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's why we do live TV, because we want to know how real it is. You get to do recordings, and they're always perfect.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I do pre-recorded programs, so we can edit out the glitches.
There you go. So a couple of great things coming up. You've got the conference coming up in August. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, first weekend in August, Skywatch TV's first ever Defender Conference. It sold out very quickly, so the 2020 conference will be in a larger venue. We'll announce that at some point after this conference, or maybe at this coming conference. But we're looking forward to roughly 1,000, maybe 1,200 people coming to Branson, Missouri to see the likes of Tom Horn, Dr. Michael Heiser, Joel Richardson, Pastor Carl Gallups, and then us from Skywatch TV, Josh Peck, Sharon K. Gilbert, and me, and as well as Donna Howell, Allie Anderson, Joe Artis Horn, and more. So Shelley Neese, the author of the Copper Scroll Project, and Jim Barfield, the executive director of the Copper Scroll Project, will be there as well. But because it sold out so quickly, the only option for people who want to see the presentations is to take advantage of streaming video, which we are arranging through a company that's successfully handled this for the Hear the Watchmen conferences over the last several years. So it's going to be a high-quality video stream. Should be no issues with buffering or skipping or anything like that. And the presentations will be available for 90 days, 3 months after the conference. And people can find out more if they're interested at the conference website. That's defenderconference.com.
That's good. And I think my good friend Michael Lake is going to be there with you as well.
That's correct, yes. Shouldn't overlook Michael Lake.
Yep, he's going to miss out on his slot because he's flying back the next day, which is his regular slot on the program. As we have a great many of the Defender authors. We just had Allie on last week, and I have to tell you that I didn't know she was Joe's daughter. So that
Tom's daughter. Joe's sister.
Joe's sister, but Tom's daughter. But I am just blown away by the acumen, by the whole environment of Skywatch and Defender. These are issues that people don't tackle. UFOs, the gods of antiquity, the ancient mythology. There have been those that have dabbled in it, but to expand it to the depth of your research, which you are a commensurate researcher and surrounded by a peer group of researchers. Her credentials in as a private investigator blew me away, and just said, you know, you would go that far to learn how to investigate properly, really is a reflection on Skywatch. And so people know, we do not have a relationship where we are compensated or where we sell advertising or commercials. Our relationship with Skywatch and with Defender is admiration, respect, honor, dignity, and kingdom-mindedness that says, hold on a second, there's a couple of people that are doing this. They're doing it a little bit different, but they're doing it in the same level of biblical integrity. Why should they not be talking to each other and granting our audience access to your audience and your audience access to ours, so they can hear things that we cover, which you don't cover. You don't cover caregiving, or we have an expert, one program a month on recovering from abuse or recovering from shame. We do kind of a 360 view of the believer's life that gives people practical tools as to how to deal with the trauma of divorce and infertility, and a couple of other things that are really, you know, they're kind of one and done. Somebody puts a book out there, 15 minutes on the radio, and you don't get any help. We actually have a program devoted to it on a monthly basis where you get to talk with an expert. And we have plugged you and your resources into that expertise in the areas of Islam, Armageddon, the end times, UFOs, the Michael Heiser line that says, hey, if it's weird in the Bible, it must be important.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, we each have a different role to play, and God has blessed us with different gifts, different strengths, and our mission, I think, is to just employ those to the best of our ability for what to the end that he's called us. Paul wrote that we're not all to be all things, to try to be all things, nor should we desire to be something that we are not. Except, of course, in that we should all desire to be holy because he is holy, and all of us fall short of that goal. But as Paul wrote, some are, it's like the different parts of the body. Some are hands, some are feet, some is heads, the eyes, and so forth. Each one of us has a different role to play. And I think Joe Horn, in his recent book, Everyday Champions, really illustrates that point well, that there are some who may feel that they're not really useful for the kingdom or for our Creator because they're not for example, a gifted speaker or a talented writer or what have you. But in quiet ways, they're encouraging others and making others feel like the worth that God that we should feel, because we are children of God. He created us. He loved us so much that his unique Son, who was the Word, who was with God and was God, is God, came to earth as fully human and sacrificed himself for us. I mean, how much more special can we be than that? And yet the enemy would work through the world, through the relationships that we have around us, by twisting them and distorting them to make us feel worthless, to convince us that we have no value. And that is a lie straight from the pit of hell. So each of us has a role to play, and in the eyes of the world, some may not be as important, but they are all vital to the functioning of the body as a whole. Just as some parts of the human body may seem unimportant or less important than others, yet without those pieces, things don't work as they should. So in the same way, we all have different gifts here at Skywatch TV and Defender Publishing, and we just pray that God finds a way to use them to maximum efficiency and maximum effectiveness.
Yeah, I think that what Joe is doing is really quite extraordinary, because he went from a sickly, uh, non-usable entity, not fit for service in the kingdom because of his frailties, because he was allergic to everything, and he was basically walking down a path towards destruction, and was able to come up with this time bomb solution, which then made him strong, rebuilt his body, and then he found out that he was able to be used of the kingdom. And if you can use this guy that's allergic to everything, can't eat anything, and he's now strong, powerful, chief operating officer there, and has come out with a book to empower the ordinary, not the extraordinary, speaks directly to his own experience of dealing with the frailty and fragility of life. So it's not this, we're going to track down UFOs and go after these crazy mountain journeys. We're going to take a look at the realities of Scripture and how it's used. And there are very interesting aspects to it as well, as we look at foods and we look at belief systems. And that's really a large part of what you took us through when you wrote in the last class of the Titans and the Great Inception, and now in Bad Moon Rising. Joel Richardson and I say the exact same thing about you. You're one of the most thorough researchers and original thinkers in the world of prophecy writers. We both, you could have put both our names on that, it would have been the same quote.
Thank you.
Because we believe that. So here we're looking at this book, Bad Moon Rising. Islam, Armageddon, and the most diabolical double cross in history. There's a lot of backstory of, as we look at Ishmael and the decision that he made right from the beginning of where he was going to take a wife from. And it was Egypt. And that he was going to follow in the path of his mother and in the path of his mother's gods, winding up aligning himself with Esau and Moab, kind of giving us this picture of the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ishmaelites, all kind of morphing into what we would call modern day Islam. But there's more to it than just those three, I guess the three patriarchs, if you will, of Islam. And there became an alliance. They had a common goal, and that common goal, I don't think that the average Bible believer or the average Bible reader or the average Sunday church goer even comprehends that we were given in Genesis 3:15 a prophetic story about two seed lines that were going to, and these were lines. These weren't necessarily individuals. They were individuals which were the product of lineage, of generations, and these became the part of that generations of the seed line of the Antichrist, the one that would crush. It says that that there'll be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and the seed of the serpent will strike the heel of the seed of the woman, and the seed of the woman would crush the head of the seed of the serpent. That set the tone and pattern for a divide, a very clear division, and two very specific camps. And you're either in the camp of the seed of the Messiah, or the seed of the woman, or the seed of the serpent.
Right. And it's timely that we're talking about this. Sharon and I produce a weekly Bible study online. Basically produce it as a podcast. So we release an audio track once a week that is a 1 hour verse-by-verse Bible study. And right now we're going back. We've started with the book of Genesis again. We're going back through the Bible in chronological order. And we just did Genesis chapter 3 this past weekend. Genesis 3:15, of course, is what scholars call the proto-evangelium, which was the first declaration of the gospel in the Bible, where the prophecy in Genesis 3:15, God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, or your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. This is the prophecy, of course, of the coming Messiah coming from the line of the woman. Of course, that this verse has been twisted, as I'm sure you know, into the so-called serpent seed doctrine, that there is a literal genetic descendant of Satan, or descendants of Satan, who are walking the earth, that Cain was the product of relations between Eve and the serpent, which is just ignores verse 1 of chapter 4 of Genesis, which clearly states that Cain was the product of Adam and Eve. But it does refer to a spiritual descendant. And that's what I've been investigating through my 3 solo books thus far. The spiritual descendants of not just the Nakash, the serpent from the garden, but also the Watchers who descended on Mount Hermon, and those who, in the pagan realm, the pagan world, the nations around ancient Israel, who venerated the dead, whom they believed to, especially the dead kings of old, whom they believed to be the ancestors of their kings. The Amorites in particular believed that the Rephaim, the spirits of the mighty men who were of old, if you catch the reference to Genesis 6 there, were literally the genetic ancestors of their kings. Now, were they really? No, I believe the Bible when it says the flood wiped out every living thing that walked the earth in the days of Noah. But spiritually, they were still worshiping and venerating these demonic spirits, the spirits that proceeded from the dead Nephilim, that the book of Enoch tells us were barred entry into the netherworld, but condemned to wander the earth, tormenting humanity until the time of judgment. This was the common belief of the Jews of the Second Temple period, the period that included Jesus and the apostles. This was the belief of the early church fathers. Most of the early Christian theologians understood that the origin of demons were the spirits of the giants, the Nephilim, who were destroyed in the flood. But the neighbors of ancient Israel venerated, worshipped those demon spirits. The Rephaim summoned them through necromancy rituals and performed sacrifices to them. They were considered the demigods, and that veneration of the demigods was transferred westward into Greece and Rome. In fact, it even continued into the Christian era. Sharon and I are collaborating now on a book that'll be out in the fall that documents this. The early Christian church, in fact, even inside St. Peter's Basilica, there is evidence that this veneration of the dead ancestors, which derives from the worship of the Nephilim, continued into the Christian era and into the Christian communities of the early church. So my research into Islam, which led to Bad Moon Rising, kind of began from that standpoint. If, as Paul wrote, we're not wrestling against human opponents, which is easy to forget when we see these video clips of bearded young men, Middle Eastern men, holding up signs saying Islam will conquer the world. You know, it's easy to forget that they're not the real enemy. Mm-hmm. The enemy are the principalities and powers and cosmic rulers over this present darkness behind them. In fact, when you think about it this way, those men holding those signs, the women wearing the hijabs and the burqas, they're human shields in this spiritual war. They are being used as human shields to get us, the rest of the world, focused on them and not on the spirits behind Islam. And so when I began looking at, okay, where did Islam originate and what was the culture that produced Muhammad and what he transformed into a religion that will become the world's largest within the next 50 years, if current trends continue. And it becomes obvious when you begin studying it that the culture of 7th century Arabia, which was very much the same as the Bedouin culture that had existed for more than 2,000 years in that part of the world. You know, going back to the days of Abraham, the Bedouin culture pretty much remained unchanged. Muhammad just essentially froze it in place in the 7th century and sacralized or made sacred the traditions and the customs of Bedouin culture, which basically means warring against other tribes stealing their stuff, taking their women, except that as Muhammad redefined it, the tribe that he represented with his religion was now a sort of super tribe. Anyone can join as long as you profess the Shahada and claim that there's only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Okay, you're in. Now you, too, can join us in raiding others outside our super tribe, taking their stuff, stealing their women, and eventually going on to conquer the world. That, in a very brief nutshell, is what Islam is all about. It made sacred the basest impulses of humanity, carnal pleasures, taking things for material gain, taking women for physical pleasure. And if you die while trying to get these things, well, hey, Allah promises you're going to get even more of this stuff for all of eternity in the afterlife. If you were an Arab in 7th century Arabia, that was a pretty good deal. That was the best deal going. And Muhammad showed that by making that his religion, any guy who could swing a sword was ready to sign on and join him. And within a 10-year period, he went from a ragtag band of a couple hundred people who got kicked out of his home city into an army that conquered all of Arabia. And within 50 years of Muhammad's death, they were besieging the capital of what was left of the Roman Empire at Byzantium.
You know, as we look at all this and we begin to connect the dots of man's false beliefs with what the Bible says is going to happen, will happen, does happen, you'll find people that say, well, there's no mention of Muhammad in the scriptures. There's, of course, he's much past the scriptures, and so it would be illogical. You don't find Napoleon, you don't find Hitler, you don't find Ayatollah Khomeini contained in the pages of scriptures. But what we find in the pages of scriptures are the full story of all that's going to take place. Now plug in the players. Okay? And that's what we get to do, is begin to examine, does this person fit the role described and defined as that player? That's the huge argument between Ezekiel 38 and 39. Who are the players? Did Psalm 83 happen already? In the Six-Day War, is it going to happen? What's Russia doing talking to Israel? If the Gog of Magog is Putin? So many questions, so little time, so much time, because until there's a signing of an agreement, a covenant with many, that's going to be the countdown where the clock starts on the 7 years. So until that happens, we're really all in preparation stage, surmising and analyzing and looking to see how we can logically extrapolate and come to a point where we can agree that this is a signpost and that the signpost says the same thing. Damascus, this direction. So that's what we get. That's what we get when we stand on Mount Carmel. You stood there a month ago as you stood on top of the building, on the rooftop there, and you stood out and you saw all the signs that pointed to Mount Gilead, Mount Hermon, and Mount Nebo, and Mount Tabor, and to this and to that, and you looked at it and you said, okay, all right, now I see the signs, I see geographically where they are. Okay, that establishes a starting point for me. Looking halfway up on Mount Hermon and seeing Nimrod's fortress, that gives me some relevance and it gives me some understanding. But the final answers, how it all plays out. This is my conversation with Zev Parat earlier about Matthew 24:36, where it says that no one knows the time except for the Father. Is that an argument against Jesus being all man and all God because he didn't know? Well, you know, God goes on to say, hey, I didn't tell Noah either. He didn't know what was going on. He knew something was going to happen, but I didn't tell him. So here's my pattern. Here's the way I operate. Okay, I'm not an oversharer. Okay, that's who I am. Okay, and I wiped out everybody there. I'm just not an oversharer. Okay? And so if you want to know my true nature, here's a little glimpse in the true nature of God. Okay? That's not a glimpse into the deity of Jesus. Okay? That's a glimpse into the nature of God. I didn't tell Noah everybody was going to be wiped out. They were marrying and partying, and then it came all of a sudden. Okay? That's how I operate. So it gives us a deeper understanding. We're talking with Derek Gilbert, author of Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. A deep dive into an understanding as we trace back to the many of the false gods in the earliest days of Bible history, why Islam is the supernatural equivalent of a corporate merger, why this is too big to be what we look at it as. It's really a conglomeration of a merger of ideologies where just like corporations merge, one comes out as the spokesperson and you identify with that spokesperson as being, I think that the equivalent example would be the Pope as being the spokesperson for all of Christianity. He is not the spokesperson for all of Christianity, but carries that perception in the world that he speaks on behalf of everybody who believes in Jesus. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into this merger, the iniquity of the Amorites, and how it's still impacting us today, and how a lot of what we see through history were foreshadowing. Herod as an Edomite, as a descendant of Esau, why he was so intent on doing what he did, going after the 2-year-old and under boys, trying to kill them off. Why was this such a passion of his? We call him crazy, we call him Meshuggah, but he had it in his DNA. The same kind of DNA that drove Haman, who was a product of Saul's error. There's linkage within the scriptures, and we need to see the connections, and that's what a great job Derek Gilbert does. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Derek Gilbert to talk about his new book, Bad Moon Rising. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Derek Gilbert, author of the new book, Bad Moon Rising, Islam, Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. This is fascinating to me that we see that actually Satan's deception, he's going to be double-crossed, he's going to be deceived, and this is biblical, huge biblical importance, because when we read about the end, we read that it's the lowest of the angels that tosses him in the lake of fire. It's not Jesus, it's not God, it's the least, while those that followed him, the third that followed him, and those on earth that followed him, stand on and look with astonishment at what's happened to this man who made them such promises. Okay? And so we know the end. Very few know the details, the little details, but I love the fact that it's the lowest of the angels. The least of them is the one that gets to toss him in. You know, we always think of this big bruising battle, and Jesus is the one that throws him in the lake of fire, but that's not how it reads. So there's what I see in the book and what I see in your research is there's a progression of alliances, not necessarily in the natural, but there is a spiritual alliance which is forming, which spirit, the Bible tells us spirit acknowledges, or spirit recognizes spirit, or spirit is drawn to spirit. So the spirit in me recognizes the spirit in you. Now we get in the spiritual realm and the spirit of the Antichrist, and let's put it under the heading, the spirit of the Antichrist would be the spirit of Esau, would be the spirit of Ishmael, would be the spirit of Moab. We can go down through the various entities and see the spirit of them having something in common and being drawn to each other. Is this how you see it?
Yeah, and that's, again, that's the thing to remember. I talked in the first segment about Muhammad having coordinated this this army by appealing to the desire for physical and carnal pleasures in the men of Arabia around him. But the important thing to remember is that it's the principalities and powers who inspired Muhammad, who looked for someone like Muhammad to coordinate on the ground in the natural realm what they were trying to do in the spiritual realm. And since the Bible tells us there are multiple gods, small g gods, who are under a death sentence, according to Psalm 82, I wanted to identify which of these spirits were the most likely members of this new coalition, this corporate merger in the spirit realm. And given that the Arabian culture of the 7th century that produced Muhammad was essentially the same culture that existed under the Amorites of Abraham's day, of the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I looked at the principal gods of Mesopotamia during the Amorite age, which was roughly the time of Abraham down to the time of David and Solomon, and found that their worship continued under different names even into the late antiquity, the time of Muhammad. The God, and put "the" in quotation marks there, called El by the Canaanites, Enlil by the Sumerians, Kronos by the Greeks, Saturn to the Romans. The storm god called Baal or Baal by the Canaanites, but called Zeus and Jupiter by the Greeks and Romans, Thor to the Scandinavians. This is the spirit identified by Jesus in the New Testament as Satan. So Satan is part of this coalition, but he's not alone. The moon god called Sin or Nana or Yarik by the Amorites. Yarik, by the way, is the name of the city that was attacked first by Joshua and the Israelites when they crossed the Jordan River. Jericho, Yarik, Jericho. The sun god, Shamash, the sun god, who was the lawgiver. Islam is nothing if not legalistic. The goddess of sex and war, Ishtar, Inanna, called Astarte in the Bible. Venus or Aphrodite, if you remember your mythology from high school. The plague god, Reshef, who we've all heard of, it's just we don't realize that we have. The plague god, also a god of war, and a special protector of chariots and chariot warriors, called Apollo by the Greeks and Romans. Or in the book of Revelation, Apollyon, the king over those in the abyss. And then the war god, who was the national god of Moab, called Chemosh, had been worshipped in the ancient Near East for 1,000 years before the Exodus, but known to us today as Ares of the Greeks or Mars of the Romans. And if we've learned nothing about Islam over 14 centuries of its history, it is that it is a religion built on war. In fact, war is its main means of conquest and of evangelizing, more or less. I believe those are the most likely spirits behind it. Certainly there are others because their demonic minions play a role in what is happening. Now, I'm certainly not an expert on Islamic theology, and there are as many divisions within Islam as there are within Christianity. But in a nutshell, that, I believe, is what triggered this religion, what got it off the ground in the 7th century, which has kept it going for the last 1,400 years, and why it's on track to play a key role in the end times. And that's the other part of the book. The last section of the book deals with why is this history relevant to us today? Well, if you've got a religion that is on pace to become the world's largest within the next half century, and we as Christians who believe that prophecy is yet unfolding before us, we need to try to figure out how this world's largest religion fits into the prophecies that we have of the end times. And I think many of us have pieces of it. I think I've fit together a plausible end time scenario, but I reserve the right to change my mind with better understanding because, as you pointed out, Rabbi, God does not over-reveal his plans because the enemy is still trying to figure it out so they can work a really convincing great deception. But I believe Islam has a role to play, and that is the great double cross, the diabolical double cross that I talk about or write about in the book. I believe that the main role that Islam will play, and I say this with no joy whatsoever, I think the Muslims mainly are being set up to be used as cannon fodder in a war, a Psalm 83 war that eventually leads to the conflict that culminates in Armageddon, where they will be sacrificed. I mean, from the standpoint of the infernal council, if you will, Muslims are already lost. They're already in their camp. They don't need to do anything more to get them because these demonic spirits, these fallen angels, already have them. They're going to be used and sacrificed to lure God's chosen people, the Jews and Christians, if we're still here on earth when the Antichrist reveals himself, into accepting the Antichrist as the false savior of Israel. I believe a dynamic military leader, religious leader, political leader, or perhaps combination of all three, will emerge to save Israel at its hour of greatest need, and he will be welcomed as the Messiah by rabbis and many Christians too, because there are some strains of Christianity that are looking for Jesus to be made manifest in the flesh, the manifest Son of God, if you will. And of course, he won't be the one. Just very simply remember, if he's standing on the ground, if he's not in the clouds with great glory, as Jesus said, it's not the Messiah. But this will be a convincing deception that will lure many into welcoming the Antichrist as the Messiah. And I think that is the role that Islam has to play. I think the two purposes for which this religion was created by these fallen entities who rebelled against their creator is, number one, to kill as many Jews and Christians as they can, to instill in us a hatred of them, which makes it more difficult for any Muslims who might consider the teachings of Jesus. When they see us Christians with hatred in our eyes, we become a stumbling block between them and the gospel. And I know it's easier said than done to approach them with love, but that is our calling. Jesus said flat out to love our enemies. But secondly, is to use them, again, as a sacrifice to lure Christians and Jews into welcoming the Antichrist with open arms. I think that is what lies ahead.
We see this division. We go back to this prophecy over Ishmael, that he will be a wild donkey among men. All the nations of the world would war against him, and he would live in hostility with his brothers. And we can see that's played out between Shia and Sunni. Maybe that's the clearest, little divide that we can see. There's many more divides with this in Islam, as many camps as conservative to orthodox as you could possibly be. But we do see main players and main locations. We see Mecca, we see Jerusalem, we see Petra, we see Mount Hermon as being the Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives. There are a couple significant places that are referenced in the New Testament as being related to the end, what we would call the end of days or end time prophecy. As we look at each one of these, do you find these as being centralized camps, as being centers of power and command, or their role in antiquity, as Mount Hermon played a role in antiquity?
Well, in my first book, the entire book was about the importance of specific sacred mountains in the history of the world, especially with the religious history that's included in the Bible. Mount Hermon, Mount Carmel, of course, the Temple Mount, Jabal al-Nur, where Muhammad received his alleged visit from a spirit that identified itself as Gabriel. I have come to believe, since writing The Great Inception, that Jabal al-Nur was not at Mecca in Arabia. In fact, one of the subjects that I touch on in Bad Moon Rising, and Sharon and I are going to dig deeper into this in a forthcoming book. We pray 2020 we'll have this one out. We think that Muhammad's revelation actually came at Petra, and that the original location of the cube that contained the black stone, the Kaaba, was at Petra. Now, we have to give credit to a Canadian historian by the name of Dan Gibson, who's written a book called Quranic Geography, in which he showed that the Qibla, the direction of prayer of the oldest existing mosques on earth, all built within 100 years of Muhammad's death, don't point to Mecca in Arabia. They don't point to Jerusalem either, which was believed to be the direction of the first Qibla. They point to within, I think, an average degree of error of like 2.5 degrees on a 360-degree, compass. All of these, and one of them is this, in Canton or Guangzhou, China. The Arabs were trading with the Chinese by sea in the 7th century, and yet they were able to focus the direction of prayer to within a couple of degrees on the compass of Petra. Now, why Petra? the god of Petra was called Dushara, which just means Lord of the Shara, or one of Shara. The Shara Mountains, the Seir Mountains in the Bible, is that mountain range along the east side of the Arava, the valley that extends from the Dead Sea south to the Red Sea. Who was Dushara? I go into that in the book. Most likely that was the national god of Edom, called Kaus, who most probably, based on the clues and the textual evidence, was the storm god, Hadad, i.e. Baal, Baal, Zeus, Jupiter, etc. He was worshipped in the form of the Arabs in the late antiquity. They did not have an anthropomorphic representation. In other words, they didn't represent an idol that looked like a bearded guy, like the Greeks worshipped Zeus or the Romans worshipped Jupiter. They worshipped him in the form of a cube. This is called aniconic worship. And when you go to Petra, you'll see that there are literally hundreds. I think they've identified 550 some odd as of current count around Petra. They were everywhere there. It was clearly a very religious place. Lots and lots of idols, but usually represented as cubes or just a faceless oval. There was a bishop, a Christian bishop in the 4th century named Epiphanius, who wrote a book called the Panarion. It was a book debunking the pagan religions of the ancient world, especially around the Mediterranean. He wrote that at Alexandria, Egypt, a virgin was worshipped in this way. An idol representing the goddess was brought out of a secret chamber below ground, and they walked around the sacred place counterclockwise 7 times. Now, that should sound familiar because that's exactly what Muslims do today around the Kaaba in Mecca. The key here is that Epiphanius said, likewise at Petra, the Nabateans, the Arabs, worship a god born of a virgin. Now, the thing is, scholars believe that Epiphanius confused the Arabic word for virgin, which is ka'iba, for the word for cube, which is Kaaba. He thought the Nabateans of Petra were mocking the virgin birth of Jesus, when instead they were actually worshiping a god in the form of a cube, Dushara, or the storm god Baal, i.e. Satan, by worshiping him the same way the pagans of Alexandria did, by circling the cube 7 times. Now, why is the black stone now in Arabia? Well, there was a civil war in Islam in the late 7th century, and one of the surviving companions of Muhammad grabbed the black stone. Apparently, this is a theory because you can't find this in the official Muslim histories anywhere, but it is known that there was a civil war inside Islam, and the Caliph in Damascus sent an army to try to smash the rebellion. And lo and behold, archaeologists from Brown University have found evidence of a battle that took place inside Petra, stones from a ballista that were launched into the city against the temple of Dushara. And it appears that the black stone was moved during this period of conflict within Islam and taken 700 miles into the desert, where it was far away from the Caliph in Damascus. So why, the bottom line here is, why is this important? Because Petra appears to be a place of spiritual significance. We believe, Sharon and I, that this was Kadesh Barnea, where Moses struck the rock with his staff and water gushed out and provided for the Israelites. I know that there are some good friends who believe that this is in Arabia, that the split rock on top of Jebel al-Lawz is the rock. But look, if the Bible is accurate, and we're dealing with a couple of million Israelites plus their flocks and herds that all need to be watered in the middle of the desert, you need a lot of water. And you can go on the YouTube right now and take a look at what kind of water flows out of Petra when it rains hard. The Nabateans built a dam to divert the water of the Wadi Musa, or the River of Moses, out of the city because it would flood the city. Last November of 2018, they had flash flooding at Petra where people had to be rescued. Hundreds of tourists had to be rescued because the water came down so hard, so fast, and flooded through the Seek, which is where the Wadi originally drained, that people were in danger of being swept away. People occasionally die at Petra if they're in the wrong place when a flash rainstorm hits because the water just runs right off the surface of the desert there. So we believe that, just imagine this now, if that Sikh, that gorge created when the two walls of the canyon separated? What if that was what broke apart? What if that was the rock that split to produce water when Moses struck it? We need to do more research on that, but we suspect that there's some spiritual significance there, that perhaps that was where God welded the Israelites into a nation before bringing them into the Holy Land. That appears to be where the rebel angels created their new religion to launch an end times assault on the mountain of God in Jerusalem.
Which would justify the two uninhabitable places during the millennial reign. Petra being one of them, which is burning in sulfur and fire and consumed by jackals, by goats, and by unclean animals, where the demons are bound, and in Babylon, where the demons are bound, two places that cannot support human life. But when Jesus comes to bind Satan for 1,000 years, you can't bind Satan and not bind the demons. So there's got to be this activity to where do you put all these demons? The Talmudic question is, how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin? We see that same question answered when Jesus asked the man who was consumed by demons, how many, what is your name? And he says, our name is Legion, for we are many.
Right.
That's at least 10,000, and that's just in one man. So we know you can fit a lot of angels, a lot of demons into a lot of places. So we look at these two specific places. Babylon, okay, by name, is an uninhabitable place on earth because it's burning with sulfur, but yet the animals are there. Okay? The unclean animals are there, okay, bearing the demonic spirits. And the second uninhabitable place during the reign of Jesus is Petra. Why? Because he had to go there and decimate. He had to go there to defeat the armies of the Antichrist. This was their gathering place. This was a place where the demonic was birthed, and this is where the demonic will be held captive, all right, only natural. Babylon, okay, where the demonic was birthed and where the demonic will be held captive. Oh, you thought you were going to become God, okay? Well, I'm going to bind you there. Oh, you thought you were going to overtake the leadership of Israel and therefore thwart the plans of God and become the I am. I will ascend to the I ams of Isaiah, where Satan says, I will ascend to that's where you were going to do it from. Well, let me show you, boys, I got this, and here's the two places, and they happen to be the two places you and I are talking about, Petra and Babylon. And
right,
the same
and I
people.
just point out very quickly that the Babylon, one of the reasons I believe Babylon, let me backtrack, I think one of the reasons God told Abraham that his descendants would return from Egypt after 400 years or after 4 generations, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. We need to remember that it was the Amorites who founded Babylon. Babylon was an unimportant village in what is now modern Iraq until an ambitious Amorite chief decided to start taking some territory from his neighbors. And by the time of Abraham, Hammurabi the Great, Babylon had become the most powerful nation in the ancient Near East, but also had established the occult system that is the symbol of the end times church of the Antichrist. And it was founded by the Amorites. The iniquity of the Amorites still influences the world today. And secondly, referencing Petra. Now, this may be a stretch, and I'm willing to accept that maybe this is taking things a little too far, but in the book of Malachi, the opening verses of Malachi chapter 1, is an oracle given to Malachi about Edom. And he writes, if Edom says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins. Now, let me back up. It says, yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. I have laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to jackals of the desert. If Edom says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins, the Lord of hosts says, they may build, but I will tear down, and they will be called the wicked country and the people with whom the Lord is angry forever. Why did I include this in the book? Because the word translated jackals in Hebrew is tenot, and you can correct my pronunciation because I'd like to get it right, but it's based on a root that it shares with the Hebrew word for dragon, tenin. And in fact, the King James translators rendered that verse dragons instead of jackals. Right. Dragons, tenin, are the dragons of Edom. the spirits behind Islam created at Petra? Again, could be speculation, and I'm stretching things too far, but I
We'll
found it
find
very
out.
interesting that it seems consistent with what we've
Right.
seen here in history over the last 1,400 years.
But unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're talking with Derek Gilbert, author of Bad Moon Rising, Islam Armageddon, and the Most Diabolical Double Cross in History. You can find this at Amazon. You can find this Defender Publishing, Defender Books, and Skywatch TV. Derek, always a joy to be with you, my friend, and I will see you next month. Give our love to your wife, and God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.